What does an architect do? And in this series, I'm going over what an architect does. So you've won the project, and now where does it need to go? So there are two potential options for where a project could go, and I'm going to explain them both in this one. So either you're going to go into a programming phase or schematic design. Programming comes before schematic design. Hello, I'm Caitlin Rosier, a licensed architect and founder of mentorDINO is your go-to resource for professional growth and development. In 2023, I launched this YouTube channel to share experiences, stories, and resources with you. But I need your help to be able to host live panel discussions, interviews, on-site trainings, and mentorship groups. I need to hit 1,000 subscribers to be able to do that on YouTube. So I'd really appreciate your support in hitting the subscribe button below and letting your colleagues know about this resource. Let's build a brighter future together. Welcome to mentorDINO. Now let's dive into the discussion. What does an architect do? And in this series, I'm going over what an architect does. And if you haven't checked out the other two videos, please check them out as I go through an introduction of the timeline of a project through design and construction, and went over the first phase before a project gets started. So in this video, we're going to go over you've won the project, and now where does it need to go? So there are two potential options for where a project could go, and I'm going to explain them both in this one. So either you're going to go into a programming phase or schematic design. Programming comes before schematic design if you have to do both of them. Programming involves helping the owner figure out what they actually need. Sometimes in the proposal phase, they will already have a program listed out, which tends to be very helpful whenever we're putting together how much time we think it's going to take to do the project. Sometimes it may be very vague, and they may ask for us to do a programming portion of our design phase to help them figure out all their answers. You may be putting together a hotel where they still need some help figuring out how many rooms that they want to be able to have available for their staff. Education, you may need to figure out where the growth is going, and they may need help analyzing how many rooms they need and where the community is going. And sometimes they just may be taking people from a bunch of different buildings on campus and shoving them into one spot, and they may need some help understanding where there are some sharing and synergies between them to be more efficient on their space. Those are just some examples of what you could go through, but it really comes down to a lot of number crunching. We may ask for surveys from either the users, or if you're in higher education, even college students or K through 12, actual students, and potentially doing some mini workshops. But a lot of this is about figuring out the numbers for what you need to hit for the project. And we may even cross-check it with the actual proposal and how much square footage they were anticipating they would need versus what we came after programming. So sometimes there has to be a reconciliation of scope of work after programming is complete. Sometimes programming does blend into schematic design a bit, which is why I also put them together in one video. In schematic design, you're really doing either form work and understanding form and shape if you're doing a new construction building, or you may be doing initial fit out iterations. And what I mean by that is if you are renovating an office or something interior where you're not touching the exterior walls, that is what's called an interior fit out, because you are fitting out the interior. So during schematic design, you may not have to figure out form work so much, but you need to figure out relationships and spatially. So you may be doing some initial diagrams. So that's why diagramming is so important to learn in college. So you can be able to figure out relationships and just be able to think and process things a lot quicker and sketch. And this is where a lot of iterations will happen. And you will be having meetings with either the users or facilities, depending on how they want to work, to figure out what exactly they need and understanding the relationships based on what they work and how they operate. What's really fun about architecture that I like is we learn about other professions. Yes, we are an architect, but we get to figure out how lawyers operate and interact with each other, how different business models, how different work cultures integrate, how different hospital systems work together and work to flow patients, doctors, and supplies. So there's so many different workflows and different people and how they operate and how they work, and different personalities, different perceptions on pros and cons of working, and different values. So we get to put ourselves in everybody's little office or renovation project and figure out how they work to come up with the best solution for them. This may lead to us offering suggestions that go against their norms for what they're used to, but trying to find synergies to make them work more efficiently. And you come up with those the more experience you have. So this is where we blend different ideas and what's going on. If you're doing a new construction building where you are looking at form, you're going to take a look at codes to figure out where all the easements are and how far back from property lines you can go. If there's height restrictions, if you're in the flight path of an airport, that'll bring different height restrictions down. Or different municipalities or cities may have height restrictions or different setbacks as you move up a building in the number of floors. They may also have you do floor plate cuts to understand how much square footage per floor. And that really depends on the client and what you're building. And if you are doing more office renovation and just needing a certain number of occupants per floor, or if you have a different type of architecture that needs more occupancy or mixed use or higher density, then you will figure out that. You will likely also have to figure out initial, what we call core. So it would be core and shell that you start generally working on initially. So shell is your facade or exterior, and core is your center staff core system. So that's where your MEP shafts are, where all the mechanical, electrical, and plumbing go up through the building. Your bathrooms are typically stacked for efficiency. You'll have elevators if it's a skyscraper, or typically more than 2 floors, potentially even just for 2, and understanding those components and where it goes. If you do have a parking garage underneath, you may figure out initial parking layout to understand different parking capacities based on the floor plate, and playing around with structure to figure out with your structural engineer where the grid needs to go based on the flow and what systems are going in there. And that can really depend on the project type. There are different bay sizes that are better for science and tech and labs than there are for residential, healthcare, business, and even parking. So there are different things you need to think about along the way, and that's where a lot of initial conversations happen and figuring out the construction type as well. So that's all what happens within programming schematic and starting to figure out that information. Typically, you do want owner sign-off at the end of schematic design to make sure that everything moves forward and everybody's in agreement on where we are, even if not all of the questions have been answered yet, and there's still things to figure out before you move on to design development. And that's where we're going to talk about in our next video of the series. So hope you guys like learning about programming and schematic design.